Welcome, viewers and listeners, to another edition of CHP Talks. I'm here with one of our favorite guests, Kris Sims from the Taxpayers Federation, Canadian Taxpayers Federation, and she's coming to us from Lethbridge. And Kris, thanks once again for joining us. We really appreciate you bringing us up to date on all the ways that our government is wasting our money.
Lovely to see you, sir. If not in person, I'll have to suffice for over the internet.
Yeah. For those who may not have heard Kris on previous episodes, I'll give you a little introduction. She's the Alberta Director of the Canadian Taxpayers Federation. She is a longtime journalist in Canada. She was one of the founding reporters for Sun News Network. She's worked in and around government for more than 20 years. How did you survive, I wonder? She's been a guest on the show several times. She and Franco Terrazzano and others from the Canadian Taxpayer Federation host their own podcast. I highly recommend that you tune into that. And their regular taxpayer magazine, we have many copies drifting around. We get multiple copies and give them out to friends. They're a wealth of information also on their website, which is taxpayer.com. And so if you're not already a subscriber, I suggest that you subscribe to the Taxpayer Magazine and contribute to this worthwhile cause. They are helping to break the back of this basically irresponsible, wild spending government that refuses to come to terms with reality. So, and they're pushing for more freedom and more accountable government through smaller government. So I've been listening to your podcasts. I when I see a new one pop up, I can't wait to get to it. You and Franco and others do such a tremendous job. So what I want to talk about today, or what I want to have you tell our viewers and listeners about today, are some of the horrendous ways that this federal government is spending our money and our grandchildren's money, and who knows else who else's money is going to be spent before they're done. But I want, obviously, as you do, I want them to cut up their credit card and stop doing this to us. But give us some examples that our viewers and listeners may not have heard on the mainstream media.
For sure. Thank you very much for that lovely introduction. And I'm really glad that you listened to the podcast, although the last couple of them haven't been so family friendly because of the nature of the spending of the Trudeau government. So I will do my best to speak in code and not embarrass myself. Sometimes Franco can start describing things and I have to tap out of it. So suffice to say, we were inspired to go through the list of government waste that we have handy because, of course, we've seen the huge change in the United States, the election or re-election of U.S. President Donald Trump. And not only did he win a presidency, as you know, he got the Senate and he got the House and he got the popular vote. I think by law now, technically, he has to be the dog catcher in DC now. So he got an awful lot of support.
Yeah.
And with that came in people like Elon Musk, who is heading up what he is calling the Department of Government Efficiency, or DOGE. Kids these days are sharing memes of this cute little it almost looks like a corgi, but it's not a corgi dog. It's some sort of Japanese dog. And it's this meme on the interwebs, and it's taken on a life of its own. And now it's become this actual task force on finding waste. And so that's what re-inspired Franco and I to say, hey, we've got a lot of government waste up here. In fact, we give out these golden pig statues here. That's our Teddy Waste Awards. We give those out every single year. And so we do that in order to highlight the best of the worst of government waste. And we do that every year in order to point out that governments and bureaucracies and politicians should not be wasting our money like this. So some of the big ones that have come out recently, and I'll start with these ones first because they're yucky and I won't detail them too much. So Canadian taxpayers spent money, tens of thousands of dollars, for a display of very adult, inappropriate objects, often referred to as toys, in Germany. So for some reason, The Trudeau government thought it was a great idea to hand your tax dollars to this artist who didn't want to fund her own trip and sent her over to put these things on display in Germany. If you have the heart, go look it up. I do warn you, though, like even the name of it is disgusting. So we spent money on that. So that was crazy. We also spent money, again, I'll get through these inappropriate ones off the top. We also spent money to do a traveling show internationally to get stories about intimate relations between elderly people. I'm not kidding. Like, they invited them over to talk on camera. It's just absurd. Yeah. So that, again, just to put that into context, we're spending money on that. We should be spending zero money on that, of course. Exactly. So those are the only ones that are, you'd have to cover the kids' ears. There's other ones, though, that are still upsetting. So I know you're there in BC. Did you hear about this deer cull that was happening in the Gulf Islands?
Yes, in fact, we talked with, I think, with Carson Binda on that a couple months ago. And but for those who may have missed that, you can give us a brief overview of that project, which was so ridiculous. I couldn't believe it.
It's absolutely absurd. So, cards on the table. I was raised in rural Western Canada, right there in BC. I was raised on hunted meat, okay? If we hadn't been able to bag a deer or occasionally a moose, we may not have been able to get red meat a lot when I was a little kid. So I'm a gun owner myself, all that on the table. Fair. The problem here is that we added government to this problem. So there's this little island off the coast of Vancouver Island. It's one of those pretty little Gulf islands, and it has deer which have been deemed to be invasive, meaning they're not native to the area. And so the government, in all of its wisdom, decided to do a deer cull, meaning to kill all of the deer of that breed on that island. Now, common sense would tell you to say something like, okay, no bag limit, gentlemen and ladies. Everybody bring your campers, bring your quads, bring your rifles, no bag limit. Take as many deer as you can safely, harvest them, eat the meat, donate the meat, whatever it is. Hunters would literally pay their own money and pay for their own pickup trucks full of gas, Rod, to go do this. But no.
Yeah.
But no, the government couldn't organize a 2-car parade. So what it did is it hired shooters. I won't call them sharpshooters because they're a terrible shot. They hired shooters from New Zealand to shoot deer out of a helicopter using guns that the Trudeau government has deemed illegal. I'm sorry for laughing.
What's wrong with that story?
But it's so bad. It's so bad. And it gets sad in a second. Really sad. So they didn't get that many deer. We wound up spending, I think it's over $1 million with an M before the smoke cleared on this thing. But this is the thing. They didn't get them. They failed to shoot enough deer with their prohibited weapons from a helicopter using foreign shooters. No. This is where it gets sad, and I cried a little bit thinking about it last time, so I'll try to power through. What the government then did is they put up a bunch of nets. Anyone who has spent any time around wildlife in BC, especially deer, know what a disaster that is going to be.
Yeah.
There was one time, if I can share a story.
Yeah.
There was one time that I was walking with my family through the woods of BC, and it was up and behind what was kind of an abandoned school, and it was in the summertime, so there's definitely nobody around. And it was heartbreaking because we came around the back of the school, and there's this old soccer pitch there, and they had, how the net kind of flows down onto the grass?
Yeah.
This mother deer was there, and this little fawn was tied up in this net. She was frantic. The entire area had been dug up it was so heartbreaking, Rod. I don't know if it made it. We did have knives and we cut it out and it was standing, but we don't know if it made it. Imagine that on an entire island. There's footage. I recommend people don't watch it. There's footage of these poor animals getting tied up, entangled, and thrashing themselves to death.
Oh,
It is just unconscionable.
yeah.
So now we have folks like the Canadian Taxpayers Federation and PETA teaming up to say that this is a terrible waste of money and a silly thing for the government to have done. Those are the sorts of things, unfortunately, the Trudeau government is spending your money on. In that case, it was via Parks Canada.
Yeah, yeah. So there's so many topics that you have brought up. That's one of them. The podcasts. We are on a podcast. I think I spend something like $12 a month on for access to record these podcasts. Yes, there's a time involved. There's a few other costs, but very little cost to put out these podcasts. And yet, I've heard you and Franco describing the unconscionable expenditure of taxpayer money on unnecessary and offensive podcasts. Maybe you can give a little example without going into all the details, because the one that I heard was quite shocking that our tax dollars were going to fund that. Anyway, go ahead and talk about government podcasts.
Isn't it bad that I have to speak in code that,
Yes.
the waste isn't enough?
Yeah.
It's also like highly inappropriate. So I just wanted another little thing that it was kind of in between the deer spending and the podcast spending. We also spent money for two women to do a musical about cross-dressing lesbian pirates. I'm not kidding. Hey, if you want to go do that, like float your boat, just pay for it yourself. Why are you hitting up the government to do this? And so for the podcast thing, I thought I was misreading this. So we have an outstanding investigative journalist. He's been in the game for a long time. His name is Ryan Thorpe. Lovely man from Winnipeg. He's now full-time with the Taxpayers Federation.
He does such a great job.
Isn't he great? I'm a huge fan. And then he keeps Franco on the straight and narrow. In fact, when he was at committee, if you see Franco at committee talking about, not moving the election, you can see kind of half of Ryan's arm. For anybody who's ever been he'll get embarrassed me talking like this, but that's okay. For anybody who's into horses, okay, who's into race horses or something like that, or even barrel racing, there's always the one that's ready to go, right? The one going to do the race or go around the barrels. That's Franco. But there's always an older, steadier, calmer horse next to the other horse. That's Ryan. So Ryan found this, and I actually thought I was misreading my email. It was first thing in the morning. I roll over and I see what we've got for this morning. I thought he was talking about like government funding other people's podcasts, kind of like how they're funding the media, which is bad. Government shouldn't fund the media.
Right.
But no, this is government podcasts. The podcast from Statistics Canada. Or the podcast from, I don't know, Health Canada. Like with bureaucrats talking to each other. So number one, nobody would listen to that. Like nobody. Number two, somehow they've managed to spend, I think it's like $4,000 per subscriber. It works out to. It's around $1 million.
Come on.
This is what I'm saying. Like, this microphone's a good microphone, but honestly, like these lights are from the dollar store. Like you don't need to spend a lot of money on podcasts.
Yeah.
But just add government. So yeah, they're spending, I think it was around $1 million, but they worked it out per subscriber. It's around $4,000 per subscriber to some of these podcasts. And yeah, I'll try to, one of them, I think it was even Stats Can. It may be one of them. It was a government department that were talking about LGBTQ plus and the paranormal. So gay ghost stories. And again, if you want to listen to Freddie Mercury and David Bowie do Under Pressure in the Underworld, like go listen to it yourself. Pay for it yourself. Why are taxpayers being compelled to pay for government produced and hosted podcasts? So we're digging in. You probably have a lot of questions. We're digging into this. We want to know how many staffers are on these shows full time. Is this a full-time job for them? Is this something they just do on a Friday afternoon? But yeah, unfortunately, taxpayers are paying for government department podcasts now.
Unbelievable. Now, you mentioned this committee that Franco attended, and I listened to that podcast describing that. That has to do with it may be kind of on the back burner now because of so many other scandals going on in Ottawa, but they were talking about moving the election 1 week into the future, extending the election period or extending the time until the next election in order to, I mean, they deny this, of course, but it appears likely that the whole point of that is to allow, another 80 members of parliament to qualify for an election. They have to be in there, 6 years?
Yes.
And if they hold the election when it is scheduled to be held, they'll miss it by a week. So talk to us about that. What kind of cost that would be for them extending the election? Of course, they hide it under another. They say it is to avoid a religious holiday.
This is one of the. It's really quite despicable, to be fair. It's So you're right. So as of right now, we have the fixed election date scheduled for, I think it's the third week in October. So that's booked there. What they're trying to say, the government is trying to say is, we need to move the election later, 1 week later, so that we can avoid Diwali. Okay, fine. The little catch there, exactly as you point out and Franco pointed out, is that dozens of members of parliament will then become eligible for their big pension because they have to put in 6 years. And as of right now, the current date, they're missing it by just a few days. It's like 98% there. Imagine if you're loading a video or something and it crashes right there. So too bad for them, frankly. These pensions are outrageously expensive. This move will cost taxpayers millions of dollars if this actually goes through and it happens. The thing that's really frustrating, though, is that these politicians who a backbencher now is paid more than $200,000 per year. No cabinet, no committee chair, nothing. It's $200,000, and pretty much all of their expenses that you can ever imagine are covered, like their food and their housing and their travel, all that jazz. They're insulting your intelligence because they're trying to say, oh my goodness, it's so that we don't offend the folks who are celebrating Diwali. Okay, that's fine. Let's not offend those folks. Have it earlier.
Right.
Have it earlier.
If you're going to move it, why not move it earlier?
Have it in September.
Yeah.
Have it in August. Who cares?
Yeah.
As Franco pointed out repeatedly, and I encourage anybody to go watch the footage because it's pretty spectacular watching him walk into that lion's den and hold his own. He points out, I think there's something like 350 something days between now and then that they could pick that isn't Diwali.
Yeah.
But no, they want you to believe this little fig leaf that, this is just in order to not offend people. That might be the worst part. Wasting millions of taxpayers' money on pensions that these folks don't deserve is bad enough. But trying to tell you to swallow this because they're trying to avoid a religious holiday it's untruthful. And they should be ashamed of themselves. Yeah.
Well, with everything else that's going on right now and some of the other, very transparent subterfuges being presented by the government, they may not last until October anyway. It seems unlikely at this point that they're going to survive. This prime minister has been kind of the Teflon man and has survived so many scandals. I don't know how that's happened, but I think the wraps are coming off now and people are beginning to see behind the curtain.
On that point quickly, and speaking of pensions, the leader of the NDP, who frequently props up the Trudeau government, even though he tore up his agreement, his pension kicks in February, this February.
Right.
So we're going to have Christmas, then we're going to have February. That's when Jagmeet Singh's pension kicks in. And you know what also happens just after February? The budget. The budget is an automatic confidence vote.
Right.
Because it's a money bill. It's a huge
Yeah.
money bill. It's the money bill. My hunch, if I were to make a hunch, is that we will have an election in spring because Mr. Singh's pension's taken care of in February, and then they'll vote to bring them down over the budget. That's my hunch.
Well, that's my guess as well. I don't think we'll be in an election mode before Christmas.
No.
Even as bad as things are. By the way, I'm just putting out an article, will be out next week on the stalemate in, you call it a stalemate or a logjam in Ottawa right now with over the opposition calling for some documents that the government is reluctant to release. And of course, they're blaming each other for the fact that they're not getting anything done. To me, frankly, I think the longer they don't get anything done, the better off we are, because they're not then wasting money on useless projects. They're not passing legislation that is going to reduce our freedom and government accountability and so on. But
Amen. No, for folks, I've worked in the House of Commons, and you're right. So we kind of hear this sort of stuff happening in the States quite often. You know, they're about to run out of money and they grind to a halt and there's some last minute thing. It doesn't happen as often in Canada, but it does occasionally. So what's happened now is that remarkably, I think but at least a majority of the opposition has demanded that the Trudeau government cough up documents in relation to their science and tech sector. Basically, what it was is people refer to it as a green slush fund. Right. Crazy amount of taxpayers' money getting wasted out of that fund, next to no accountability. And so what the opposition parties, to their credit, are trying to do is force accountability. They want data, they want documents, they want receipts, and a majority of them demanded the government produce those documents. The Trudeau government is refusing. So what they're turning around and doing is saying, okay, we're not supporting anything then, including what people often refer to as housekeeping items, kind of the day-to-day tooling in the House of Commons. That's why they're called supply days and motions of supply, because it literally, each time that it's brought forward, it incurs the cost. It's like, bring forward the thing, have a supply vote, click, done. That triggers your funding. But now they're saying, no more, not until you release those documents. And so now we're having the stalemate, which is exactly what they're complaining about.
Yeah. Well, again, the longer that Mr. Trudeau doesn't do more damage to our economy and our social structures in the country, the happier I'll be. And one of the other topics, and I don't want to keep you too long here, but one of the other topics that you've discussed recently on your podcast, and it's an important one, is corporate welfare.
Yes.
Now, there's a lot of, concern about welfare dollars, but usually that's around welfare going to, the homeless and whatever. But corporate welfare amounts to a ton of money. And it's very dubious what benefit this has for Canadians. Sometimes it's pitched when the government pours money into a company, they act like they're going to create a lot of jobs and things like that. But the reality is free enterprise is stymied then when the government picks winners and losers. And often they're picking the losers. They're giving our money to losers. So I've heard rumors recently about this cricket farm is not going so well. And so talk to us about corporate welfare and what's wrong with it and a couple of examples.
Oh, perfect. And so to your point exactly on the term, we're not talking about, money that goes to folks who are down on their luck and, the homeless. And I was even questioning it many years ago. And actually, the term corporate welfare was coined by Stephen Lewis, who is a longtime left-wing socialist type guy here in Canada. So anybody that gets worried about, some hard right winger being heartless about corporate welfare, no. Stephen Lewis coined this term. And it fits because, to give you a great example, we've got multinational, multi-billion-dollar car companies, things like Ford, might have heard of them, Volkswagen, not exactly struggling to get by companies that have ponied up to Canada because, how do they put that? We're a soft touch. We just hand the money over. And so we have now, I think, combined between Ottawa and Toronto, so between Parliament Hill and Queen's Park, a lot of the auto manufacturing obviously is in Ontario. I think it's combined around $50 billion. It's a crazy amount of money. And so it's a mix of direct loans and tax credits and a whole bunch of other stuff. So it's all in this big pot of slurry we call corporate welfare. The catch is one, these companies don't need our money. They don't need your money. They don't need your listeners' money. They don't need your neighbors' money. They're doing just fine on their own. Two, exactly to your point, the government is terrible at playing investment banker. Like, they're awful at it. They don't make good bets. They don't see the real thing. And for some reason, they can't seem to read the weather forecast politically either, because we went and handed out all this money to these so-called electric vehicle companies, or these companies to make electric vehicles and the batteries for inside of them.
Right.
While ignoring what was going on down in the United States. And US President Donald Trump is not super keen on banning gasoline and diesel-powered cars. Right. Newsflash. What the Trudeau government is doing, and this is really important, and a lot of people don't know this, the Trudeau government is going to ban the sale of new gasoline and diesel vehicles by 2035. And if you're thinking, oh, that's years in the future, it's way far away, the Trudeau government was elected around the same time ago. Wow. You probably remember that happening.
Yeah.
That's how quick our new vehicles are going to be taken away from us. And we're going to be forced to buy these Trudeau trolleys, these battery-powered cars. And so not only is this a huge waste of money in the sense of corporate welfare, throwing good money after companies that don't really want to make something that people aren't buying anyway, that there's no real market for as of right now, but also, it's kind of coupled with bad government policy. And in this case, the really bad government policy is banning normal vehicles, banning the sale of new normal vehicles, because one, you should be able to drive the type of vehicle you want, period. The government shouldn't be able to tell you what to do there. Two, people can't afford them anyway. Even the sticker price at the lot, even with the so-called rebates or the credits you get back, it's still way more expensive to purchase an electric car. And three, this is the big one. Where is the energy going to come from?
Yeah.
Like, I don't think you guys get the same warnings in BC. I grew up there, so I don't remember seeing them. But I'll tell you, here in Alberta, we get frequent warnings on our phones saying things like, don't use your hairdryer. Don't plug in your toaster, or we're going to have a blackout on our energy grid. Like, I'm not kidding. Yeah. And in Alberta, which is kind of sad. But the question is if we're being told that now, how are we all supposed to power these mandated Trudeau electric vehicles?
Well, there's only two choices there. One is that they're not smart enough to think about that. They haven't figured it out because they do not have a plan for supplying that electricity. The other one is a little bit more sinister, that they actually don't intend for Canadians to be able to drive around in any kind of a car, not the way we are now. Maybe they don't intend for Canadians to have a family vehicle in the same way that we're used to. I mean, I drive around our neighborhood here, and most houses have two vehicles because, husband and wife work or have different schedules or whatever. Can you imagine if you drove around in all these driveways, you only saw a car in about every 1 out of 10 driveways? That may be where they're going. Maybe the more likely thing is that they're just brain dead and haven't figured it out. But
no, it's interesting you raise that if you have time. Sorry to interrupt, but
yeah, no,
I get that question all the time of Is it malice or incompetence?
Yeah.
That's always kind of the question.
Or
And
both.
a very good friend of mine once said, if this were just happenstance, like flip a coin, oopsie, things just happen, every now and then they would accidentally do something right.
Yeah.
Which gave me pause. And another thing, I talk about this issue quite often. And one of the gentlemen that I was debating, he was really upset with me. I was debating him on things like the carbon tax and electric vehicles and that sort of stuff. And he straight up said, I don't want people owning their own vehicle. We can all live in little kind of collective groups. I'm not joking. And we can have a little government run electric bus that takes us places if we need to leave our home. It was alarming. The other element here is if they're just not thinking about it, that's a huge thing to not think about, because I sat down and did the math. Okay. And I figured out, how many vehicles we have physically in Canada, privately owned vehicles, how much an electric vehicle on average uses per day for energy, worked out the kilowatt hours, all of it. If all of us, say tomorrow, we all switched our vehicles to electric. It's not what's going to happen tomorrow, but let's say for the math's sake.
Yeah.
All of our vehicles that we have right now were all electric. We would need 14 new CANDU reactors. The big ones. The big ones that we see in like Ontario. 14 of them. Each of those things costs between 10 and 15 billion dollars to build. And nobody's building them right now. We're talking about some modular nuclear here somewhere, somehow in the prairies, maybe someday. But nobody's talking about building the big ones, and it would take 14 big ones. It's pretty wild.
Yeah. No, that's incredible. And the idea that you just go to electricity and all of a sudden all problems solved, we just plug it in, right? Like that. It's like they don't really think about where money comes from, and they don't think about where energy comes from.
Remember when we were kids at the BC Hydro commercial? Electricity doesn't come from a hole in the wall. And it shows the cartoon of the hydroelectric. They need to watch that cartoon.
Yeah, exactly. No, I think you should make a campaign out of that. So the bottom line here is that we need government to stop spending money they don't have. One thing I really liked that Franco has brought forward a couple times, I find it almost hard to believe, but he said they could balance the budget if they just went back to the 2022 budget that was already way over, they spent way too much money in 2022, but if they went back to that budget today, they could balance the budget this year. Now, for listeners, not everyone understands the term balance the budget. It just means stop using your credit card. It doesn't,
Yes.
You haven't paid off one dime of what the $1.2 trillion that we owe. It just means you're not adding to it anymore.
Yes.
We're already spending, I think it's about $125 million a day interest on our national debt. And that's an unbelievable amount of money. I'd love to have $125 million a day to spend on good things. But,
no kidding. No, to your point. And that was every now and then, Franco still surprises me with some things on the podcast where I'm like, did I hear that right? And that was exactly one of those moments, is when he said, yeah, if they went back to, it was either the 2021 or the 2022 budget, one of those budgets, if they went back to that level of spending, we'd have a balanced budget. Like no deficit. Like we'd still have the debt, of course, but at least we'd stop digging.
yeah.
And if you think back to that time, those weren't austerity years. They were still blowing money. A lot of that stuff I just described to you off the top of the show was probably allocated at that time. So if they just did that, but you know what? They won't.
Yeah.
They won't. We have tried to be funny. We have tried to be firm. We have tried pleading with them. Franco does a massive pre-budget report. All of us do, different directors for different provinces, but Franco's is like crazy. It's like 75 pages long, and he goes through it line by line. He does have a degree in economics. Don't let anybody tell you that I told you that, but a master's degree. So he does all this. It doesn't matter. They still have a $40 billion deficit. What we're paying, so they've doubled the debt. We did a funny little spoof for Halloween with the scary debt clock in Calgary. They've doubled the debt in 9 years, doubled it. So all of the prime ministers we had before us, picture their governments. Under Harper and Chrétien, even the first Trudeau, Diefenbaker, all the way back down the railroad to Sir John A. Macdonald. Imagine all of their governments, all of the wars and the depressions and the downturns they've had, all that debt, double it. That's what this Trudeau has done. And the interest we pay on that debt is more now than we pay for health care. It's more, this blew my mind. It's more than the line item for the Department of National Defense. It's just the interest that we're paying on this debt. And so we need to stop now. Once you're in a hole, best thing to do is stop digging. And so you're right. The government absolutely needs to stop wasting money. It needs to stop expanding its powers, and it needs to lower our taxes, which is why we're constantly saying lower taxes, less waste, more accountable government.
And that's a great, great theme. And thank you for your persistent and consistent work moving in that direction. As you know, the Christian Heritage Party, we've never had the opportunity to bring our policies to Ottawa, but our policy is mandatory balanced budgets. Now, in the last few years, we've had some mandates that we all hated, having to do with COVID and vaccines and things like that. But having a government for the citizens to mandate the government, and for the government to accept the mandate that we will not spend money we don't have, and that we're not courageous enough to ask for from the taxpayers. That's the thing, is they can promise all kinds of things on the campaign trail, but they don't clue people in that, by the way, this is going to mean massive debts, massive taxes, and in the future, it's going to collapse one day. You cannot keep doing this and expect it to go on forever. So, Kris Sims, the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, and the Alberta president of that organization, thank you once again for joining us. We really appreciate you bringing us up to date. We hope that we have better news to talk about the next time we meet. We need a Canadian Department of Efficiency, as they're going to have in the States. And I think Elon Musk is already busy, so we'll have to look for someone else that has his expertise. Maybe
we'll keep begging him.
Yeah.
I think brighter days are ahead. Hang in there, everybody.
All right. Well, God bless you. Thank you very much. And if I don't talk to you before Christmas, we're coming up to that season. So we wish you a wonderful winter and Christmas season and a great new year.
Merry Christmas. Thank you.